Soo Jin, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to connect with us and to share with Courage Class the wisdom, the good news, and the expertise that we're going to talk about on in our discussion today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Our pleasure. And I want to start off by speaking directly to the folks who are listening to the podcast right now. Would you be willing to speak directly to the person listening right now if someone is really struggling to embrace their identity, their cultural heritage, who they authentically are? If they take everything you're about to share into account, what becomes possible in their life?
I absolutely love this question. Possibilities are endless, of course. And I think about if in my own life too, like I've spent my life feeling like I'm either too much of this or not enough of this, and all due to my cultural identity and the intergenerational traumas that I'm holding. But if healing is part of your practice, if healing is possible, then you will be moving on from this survival automatic response to a place of trust, of belonging, of a sense of freedom, which you'll be able to define all of those in your own terms too.
Which is incredible. Yeah. I took a deep breath when you said that automatic survival response.
Huh.
Well, and that's something that I know I can relate to. So many in our Asian American, our collective community can relate to this feeling of just hustle, hustle, hustle,
Yeah.
or feeling too much or not enough. I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit, why did you start the Yellow Chair Collective? What was the inspiration around creating such a beautiful space for the community?
Yeah. So the Yellow Chair Collective, I am the executive director there. And Linda Yoon is the founder of the Yellow Chair Collective. And she and I are really amazing friends. We are like best friends now. And we worked at a community mental health setting together. And this was before we were even licensed clinicians. And we were working primarily with Asian and Asian American immigrant and refugee communities in particular. So we had a lot of clients that were elderly immigrants from Thailand, from Cambodia, from Korea in particular, because we also speak Korean language and provide that in service. And what we witnessed within kind of the mental health system itself was that it wasn't really fitting with the ways
Mm.
in which that they needed care. Mental health is something that is so out of the language that we speak in our identity, in our culture. And so when we try to approach them with our traditional methods of how we do mental health care, which is mostly talk therapy, it's a very European language and knowledge. And so if we try to fit that into the people that we were trying to serve, it just wasn't working. And one time, there was this beautiful community event that had been hosted by our mental health clinic at the time, where food was kind of the big topic of that community event. And I realized at that moment that we needed to include things that were of our identity, our culture, and our own even physical healing methods and
Mm.
integrate them into our mental and emotional care. And so Yellow Chair Collective really derives from this idea of both Linda and I feeling like we want a space for ourselves where we feel a sense of belonging within the healing space and where there is really a generational healing space. So, like, if I wanted to bring my mom to therapy, what would that look like? Was a lot of the question that I had in my mind. Because she doesn't want to go see a therapist, like a traditional therapist. So, then what would that mean that I would like for her to receive therapy? What would that look like? And a lot of exploration of our own strengths, not just trauma, but our own strengths and courage was something that was really important part of the conversation and the culture that we were trying to build at the Yellow Chair Collective.
Yeah, I mean, it's so evident whenever everyone has to go to the website, we'll certainly post it. But if you just read and engage with the materials, and you really feel that sense of belonging, you feel seen and you feel heard. I should also share, is Yellow Chair Collective exclusively for the Asian American community, or do you serve other clients who might be listening, who maybe don't identify with our community?
Absolutely. We do have a special focus in serving the Asian and Asian American community. And actually, we never really imagined that that was gonna be our focus at all. It just
Really?
happened to be
Oh,
with Linda and I both identifying as a bilingual Asian American individuals that were trying to create a space of belonging for ourselves, that it became that way. And especially in the midst of COVID, there was that anti-Asian hate crime, and a lot of folks were asking the question of like, well, how do we really support ourselves when we are being so re-traumatized of all the hatred that was outpouring into a very specific racialized community, right? And so our overarching theme is identity, intergenerational trauma, and a sense of belonging. And so that's not exclusive to the Asian and Asian American folks, of course.
mm,
The reason why we ended up focusing on it is because I'm creating a space for me and
yes,
so much of my
for the
experience.
client. Yes,
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
So much of my own experience is my identity as an Asian immigrant. But of course, we do service all sorts of different folks from all walks of.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, being in and of the community is such a powerful impetus and rooting, I would imagine. Could I ask you, Soo Jin, what was younger Soo Jin like? Were you always a community builder? Were you always a listener and a connector and a healer as a young child?
You know, I think back, and as you're asking this question, the first feeling that I had was like a little sense of grief and sadness for my child
Mm,
self. As you're asking, like, were you always a healer? And I
mm,
think about it and I was like, yes, I kind of was. And I think I was put in that position though as a child that so going back, my younger brother, I'm an eldest daughter. And so this is also
me
a
too.
theme that are listening are going to be able to relate to. But I
Mhm.
particularly had a younger brother who was pretty severely ill growing up. And so he got sick very often. He got into a car accident a very big surgery when he was very little. And so then I became this mother figure to my brother very, very, very early on. And I am also an immigrant. And so trying to adjust to this new society, new
Mm.
culture, new identity, new everything, right? Was something that was very burdensome for my little tiny kid self. And so I have this shift where in my mind as a kid, I didn't think that I was parentified per se when I was very, very young before an immigrant. But there was this shift when we had immigrated and my brother had gotten sick, where I had really been parentified is kind of the term that we use a lot in our field.
Yeah.
And I became kind of a mother figure for my brother.
Mm.
And so yes, in a sense that as young Soo Jin was a healer for myself, my family, my brother in particular. And that identity extended within friendships too, where I felt like I had to take care of people around me and my friends. Not to say that not the circumstantial things, but just me within me. I do love servicing other people. I know that that is something that is very giving to myself as much
Mm.
as I'm giving to other people too. But I think the circumstances didn't allow for me to have other parts of the identity be as much explored as
Oh.
much as that healing part of me, if that makes sense.
Yes, it absolutely does. And I want to thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that piece. I know I didn't ask you that in the original episode outline, but I was just so compelled to learn more about who you were as you were describing Yellow Chair Collective. I think that
Mhm.
so many of us can identify in some way, shape, or form to being thrust into responsibility. You said parentified. I heard
Yeah.
you say that. You
Mhm.
you said became the mother figure to your brother.
Mhm.
I think that many of us can really identify or grasp or glean to an aspect, if not the entire story that you just shared, Sujin. I want to sort of shift and talk about this incredible book
Mhm.
that you and Linda wrote, Where I Belong, Healing Trauma and Embracing Asian American Identity. And off camera, I was just sharing with you how strongly the book resonated with many of my experience. I saw myself in so many of the stories that both of you had written about. And I wonder if I may read a piece of your book right now. Would that be okay with
Yes,
you?
of course. Yeah.
This was one almost at the very beginning of the book that just sort of hit me in my face because it just so beautifully captured what I was feeling
Mhm.
and what I felt for basically my entire life. As Asian Americans, our identities are shaped by those around us, especially because our diasporic experience means that we often find ourselves caught between places between the countries of our parents or our heritage and the country that we find ourselves in. That's gonna make me cry. Our families and communities shape who we are, and it can be challenging to realize what you need to take care of ourselves. Excuse me, challenging to realize that we need to take care of ourselves in ways that are unfamiliar to older generations. And when read that, I most immediately think of therapy
Yeah.
because you had shared that that was not language that your mom spoke. That was not language that was spoken in my family at all. And I wonder why you wrote this book with Linda and why now? Why
Yeah.
now talk about intergenerational trauma?
Yeah. Like I had said that, in the midst of COVID is when we had wrote this book. And in fact, we didn't think that we were going to be writing a book at all. It
Really?
was not intended that we were going to be writing a book at the time. What we were creating was a community space of healing. We had these support groups and workshop spaces for people to be able to process the trauma that we were experiencing at the time of, again, all of the anti Asian hate crime that was on the screens and feeling really insecure and unsafe on behalf of our elderly parents because we were seeing, elderlies being really hated on the
Mhm,
screens. And
mhm,
so we were trying to process all of these, and the emotional elements of processing is the language of therapy. And then we realized that there needed to be this historical lens as well as the cultural lens in which that we bring the context of why
mm,
healing needs to look different for us or why we are being triggered by the things that we're triggered and why we respond to trauma in the ways that we respond, especially in isolation and in silence. And
Could
so
you sorry, no, go ahead, keep going.
yeah. So building these context was really, really important for us. And so for us, talking about our own, having a space to talk about our own stories of our identity and our struggles and being heard with each other was really important. And so we had created a space to do that. Now, somebody within that group that we had hosted so many of these groups at the time, and an individual had reached out to their friend who is a literary agent and said, like, I really like this material. I think you will find that to be interesting as an agent. And so then that agent had reached out to us and said, we had all of these materials available online for people to be able to explore and said, the curriculum that you have about talking about the historical trauma, the lens in which that Asian Americans are suffering in a very unique way, it reads like a chapter in a book to me because I'm a literary agent. Would you
Hmm,
like to expand into writing what you're doing? Because I think we could use that as a resource. And Linda and I quickly thought, you know what? I think we do need to write it into a book because so many people were asking for resources and we didn't have any at the time. We had perhaps like loose articles here and there that we could put together, perhaps, some Instagram accounts that people were gathering and sharing stories, but nothing into a cohesive book format
yeah.
that you can gift to other folks when they're going through a healing journey. And so that's how the book came to be. And so, Lindsay, you had mentioned, that you found yourself within the books and the stories. That was the entire purpose, was that you feel as a reader like you're part of this greater community of people that
Mhm,
are being vulnerable in sharing their stories
yeah.
so that you have the courage to feel like you can explore your story with vulnerability too.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's incredibly powerful, and I will add that not only are there these incredible highlights of different stories, but there are and we're going to get into it, some practical skills that
Mhm.
people can engage literally right after this if they wanted to, and it's all to your point, it's all in one book that folks can peruse and pick and read through and decide like how I want to engage these different practices. I mean, it's an incredible resource for the community. Thank you and Linda so much for writing it. I'll just share with you really quickly. I just interviewed Ko-Im, and
Mhm.
she was the person who wrote the Newsweek article right after the Atlanta spa shootings. And I said to her that that was literally the first time, besides the movement that was, and all the discussion that was surrounding the pandemic and all the hate that was coming out, all the articles that you would see, all the images that you would see. But she was the first person where I was like, oh my gosh, like that is exactly how I feel. And now we have an actual book where I belong to reference, to engage that healing process and to feel more connected to the folks in our community as well. I wonder, Soo Jin, if you would be willing to talk a little bit more about context. You use that word several times. I heard you use that several times. Context specific to the Asian American community, how we are triggered in certain ways. Could you share with us some examples maybe of how that might look like and how that might be different in our community in contrast to others?
Yeah. I think about my own story, and my grandmother was, after the Korean War, they were very poor, and she was essentially sold off to her other relatives to be a housekeeper. So that was her way of surviving. Her family had completely been split apart from the war, and her way of living, her way of surviving was now cleaning and being kept to herself. And then she was very young when she had my mom, and my mom, she has very, very high anxiety and stress about how a woman should behave, how a woman should be, because her identity solely also depended on being a housewife. That was what was taught to her by her grandmother, right?
Mm.
This is the survival method of the women in her household.
Mm.
And so when she had me, the thing that she really wanted to teach me, again, was her survival method of how to find a sense of her sense of belonging really was the identity of being a wife. And so even since I was a child, like how I behaved around other kids, around other girls, especially what I wear was really important to her. And at the time, to me, it felt so limiting. Right, as a
Yeah.
kid. But knowing this, even this context of my mom's upbringing and my grandma's story has really helped me expand on the idea of why my mom was so sheltering of me, because she really was afraid that I wouldn't have a place in this world otherwise. The how I appear directly equated to my sense of identity and belonging in this world. And so that is an intergenerational trauma of the women in my household in particular. So that's the story of me and my family. And I challenge you to think about your own understanding of where did you learn your sense of belonging, and
Mm.
how was that passed down to you? Or the lack thereof for most of us as Asian and Asian Americans. Right? Even in the other context, not just my familial context, but in the context of the school systems that I grew up in, or my localized experiences too. I have racialized experiences of microaggressions where people just continuously, even though I grew up here, people continuously had said, you speak English really well.
Mhm.
And it's a very foreignizing thing to assume that I just wouldn't speak English. In fact, where I would be speaking English better than my own language because
Mm.
I went to school here. Right? And so all of those microaggressions, or just straight up racism of being told, like go back to your country.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of folks that were also born here would say, well, I don't have a country to go back to. This is my country,
Yeah.
right? So those racism of experiences, we internalize all of those experiences
Mm.
into telling ourselves that we don't belong here at the end of the
Mm.
day. It's not just that other people are telling us that we don't belong here, but we internalize to tell ourselves that too.
Mm.
And so those pains, those struggling points, coupled with the fact that we were told to survive quietly. One of the other thing that my grandma, of course, through the war history that she had survived through, she has learned how to hide pain very well. She has been taught how to live quietly very well. And that's a survival method that has also been taught to my mom and to me as well. And so we have also internalized those experiences of a lot of Asian American households where we have to struggle quietly and in isolation.
So painful.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know when generally someone from our community begins to explore that origin story of how they came to understand belonging, are there stereotypical feelings that they start to surface?
The thing that comes up a lot for some of the themes that comes up a lot in the current state is perfectionism and burnout. We experience so much of giving and prioritizing other people as women and also Asian Americans. That is something that is just innate in us to
Yeah.
have to neglect our needs and take care of other people's needs
Yeah.
first. And so that's a theme that comes up very often, which leads to burnout, which leads to also depression and high anxiety too. And so it shows up in a way of perfectionism very often.
I see. I see. I mean, that's unfortunate. That's my story. Not unfortunately, that's my story. That's also I'm learning in therapy. That's also where my power comes from. Just like owning that out loud. But I remember when I first started exploring that in therapy, being very angry with my parents. Why
Mhm.
didn't you teach me this? And that has since shifted. That has been shifted into own compassion for myself and for my parents. They were doing the best they can. Um,
Yeah. So I think
so
that language that you're talking
yeah.
about of even exploring anger,
Uh,
and we like to say that what kind of permission do you have to explore types of the spectrum of emotions that you even carry within your life too? Because we are allowed to be angry. As I say that, I'm like,
yeah.
but are we really
Yeah.
allowed to be angry,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so to go through the healing journey doesn't mean that you're just landing right away into a place of compassion and just complete understanding
Yeah.
and you're at peace all the time. It really isn't. Right? We hold on to the emotions of peace and understanding and self-compassion and the other spectrum of rage and anger about what's
Yes.
happening too.
And you can move in and out of that. It's like, are you
Absolutely.
okay? I see. I see. I mean, it's so helpful to hear that. This is a new process just for me personally. I imagine for many in the Courage class community, it's something that we are just learning about. So it's helpful, and this is the overachiever in me. I'm like, it's not a destination. It's not like you get a grade in this process, and that's something by itself to be dealt with for me.
Yes,
But
exactly.
I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that. So
Mhm.
would you be willing to define for us? We've used some pretty big words from intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
What exactly is that?
Yeah. So intergenerational trauma, I like to put this in a very, very simple terms. It's just pain points that has occurred in previous generations that has never been talked about, never been understood. The brains have never really processed what was occurring. What was that pain? What did that look like? It was never expressed. And that gets put into this box and it gets handed over like a gift to the next generation, to the
Yeah.
next generation.
Okay.
But the analogy that I like to make is this gift it's almost invisible. It's like a ghost.
Mm.
It's a gift that is alive also. And so it's a ghost. This gift is a ghost that gets passed down. And so sometimes this gift, this ghost serves us in a way that feels helpful in our lives. And you had mentioned this too, how you owning this perfectionism and naming it but also really knowing that it has kept me not just alive, but thriving at times too. And
Mm.
so, yes, this gift can be helpful at times, and at other times, because the birthing place comes from a place of pain, that it still continuously hurts us too.
Yes, yes. I love the analogy of the ghost because it feels like, because are you aware as an individual that these are the gifts slash the ghosts, the package that is being handed to you? Or,
Sometimes, and sometimes
oh,
most of the times, you aren't aware of it until you are.
until you are. Yes.
Yeah, until something comes that brings you that awareness, right?
Mm.
And very oftentimes it is that's when the healing journey begins, starting with that awareness piece.
I see. I see. And, when it comes to actually, let me take a step back. How do I know, or does everyone experience intergenerational trauma? Is it something that you can avoid? Or if you just grow up a certain way, you don't have it? Is it just for the few? Or would you be willing to just shed some light on that?
Yeah. I honestly, as somebody that studies, generational trauma, I
Mm,
would say it's something that we all live with.
mhm,
Every single one of us, no matter what background, what, type of person that you are today, there's a piece of you that was brought up because of your upbringing. There's a piece of you that you have been taught of certain values, again, whether that's helpful or unhelpful to your life. Because of your cultural identity, because of the historical lenses of all of the things of who you are.
mhm.
So you're not who you are independently alone. We don't come into this world alone. We
I see.
don't. We are people that are of collective
Mhm.
and we influence each other. And so no matter who you are, where you come from, you're influenced by your cultural identity and heritage. And I was going to say those can be traumatic and some of those can be traumatic and some of those may not be exactly traumatic, but we do have inheritances.
I see. I see. And what happens if a person does not heal that intergenerational trauma?
Yeah, it's called intergenerational trauma because we interact with it and we will most likely be passing it down to the next generation too. And so this movement of recognizing intergenerational trauma and trying to heal it's a lifetime of healing journey. And this healing journey, I would say, we try to embrace that because we want the next generation to take something that perhaps is more helpful than the more traumatic part.
See, I see, I see. You mentioned the healing process, and you did mention the first step to the healing process, but I would love to give it its own airtime. Could you share with folks what is the first step to initiating that healing? You said healing journey, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first step, as I had mentioned, is the awareness part. Everyone that is a listener of your podcast is great into already into this first step. We're becoming aware, we're naming what is happening. And then you begin to question, right? And I imagine that some of the parts of you that became angry was because we started questioning things. And that is part of the healing journey as well, that we get to ask questions, whether they're gentle, soft questions or whether they sound a little bit ragey and angry,
Hmm.
angry like. And that's totally appropriate for this healing journey too.
I see.
You bring the awareness and you ask questions so that you can find the pieces of the looses of okay, where was these missing pieces of the things that are making me who I am, but I never understood why. Right. And so we get begin to ask a lot of the why questions.
I see.
And then you find other people that are asking the similar questions too. And you begin to understand now and put your pieces together alongside other people's pieces together. And perhaps you're not going to find the exact answer that you're looking for, but you will begin to see that there is a thread of a sense of belonging that you are seeking.
I see. Oh, that's beautiful. How do I know that
Mhm.
this process that I'm taking steps forward, what are some of the indicators that I can pick up on?
You will begin to express things or emotions or thoughts that perhaps you have never expressed before.
Okay.
Because again, intergenerational trauma becomes intergenerational trauma because it's never been expressed. It
Mm,
comes from a place of not having this pain to go anywhere. When we start expressing, whether that's verbal, whether that's through movement, whether that's through singing it, whether that's through drawings, whatever format expression looks like to you, once it gets expressed, then there's a shift in movement that starts happening with this trauma.
I see. Oh, which is incredible. Could you share an example with our community, someone who is struggling and how they changed during the therapy or the healing process?
Absolutely, yeah. I so many
So
stories.
many. I was going to say you
I
have
know.
so many. Go
And I'm
get the
trying to
book
think
too.
of yeah. So, let me give you, 2 different ones. One, just kinda traditional therapy,
Mm,
right? I had a client who had been seeing me for a very long time, and they were gone for a few years and came back into therapy to talk about some of their relational things that are more currently happening in their lives. And then they said, one day I just kind of realized, he said, I don't know how, but one day I just kind of realized that I am no longer putting my entire identity to my career.
Mm.
It's not attached to my career anymore because that's how he was brought up, was that his career, his job, his title of the job completely is his identity, not only his identity, but is attached to his family's identity too. Parents are so proud of who he had become, which is really amazing. And he couldn't have any room to explore again any other parts of his identity because this was who he was. And through the work that he was doing with becoming a little bit more aware of why his family had attached to him and his career identity so much, and discovering all of these different elements of his racialized experiences too, and hiding a part of himself that
Mm.
wanted to be more creative, perhaps. Right. And so we started just discovering all of these things again. So the awareness part. And then he started meeting other creatives in his life too. And then he said, one day, I didn't realize, but then I'm not too caught up with these meetings anymore that they don't charge me and get me angry, or I'm not spending my nights just thinking constantly about the next day's work
Oh,
anymore.
yeah. Wow.
And so that's a healing journey that this person was on.
Is that a common theme in Asian American communities where we attach our worth to our work or our output or
Absolutely. Yeah.
okay,
And
okay.
then that goes back into the perfectionism that we had touched on, right? That we now have to become perfect in every sense, every form, because
Yeah,
our worth is tied to the outcome of whatever it is that we're putting out there.
yeah.
Most of the times it's job and work.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about one other healing story of my mom's actually. She's still in this healing journey. And my mom, I had signed her up to see an art therapist because she had a really hard time verbalizing her thoughts and she didn't really want to talk about the quote unquote trauma in her life. It wasn't something that she wanted to verbalize. And like I had said, I wanted her to express it in a way that made sense for her. And she's a very creative individual. I remember growing up, she had made everything in the house really by hand. We had this beautiful sunflower clock that she had made out of clay, and I still have this memory from a 6-year-old, and she had all these plants in the household that she had grew. She has a green thumb, and so she's a very creative individual. And I know that when we had immigrated, she had lost that part of herself. And so I had signed her up to see an art therapist, a group art therapy actually. And even though she had never exactly talked about, like verbalized her trauma, I know it was expressed in a way that was really helpful for her because she's sleeping better at night. And she has expressed anger. Like she has never expressed anger before because women, of course, she was never allowed to express anger. And so now she has expressed anger, grief. She has also expressed just this sense of laughter and joy like a little kid that I've never seen her do before.
Incredible.
And so I know that she is healing.
Thank you for sharing that. That's an incredible story, and that gives me such joy that your mom can experience that. I hear you talking in both of these stories about creativity, perhaps that wasn't allowed to be explored or expressed when folks in our community were younger. What are some of the strengths and the assets of our community? I know that there's an entire, I want to say, chapter dedicated to that, and I wonder if you would be willing to highlight that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we are so resilient
Mm,
and we have so many beautiful stories
yeah.
of our ancestors and not only about their survival, but of their creativity, right? We also, if you think about some of the heirlooms within your identity and culture, whether that's actual a symbol of something or just something that gives you strength. Those are things that have come from your ancestors, your parents. One of the things that we love highlighting, this is we're recording in time of May where we're celebrating API Heritage
Yes.
Month. And so there's so many celebrations, right? The Lunar New Year celebrations. And in Korea, we have kind of like the Thanksgiving, but fall festivities that are really big and as a holiday in Korea. And one of the things that comes up very often as a very proud moment for our identity and our
Mm,
family identity is attached to food.
Mm.
Our spices and the way that we have really made our survival foods into a creative, so tasty,
Yes.
comforting foods is something that I'm really proud of. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of us are proud of too. It gives us
Absolutely.
literal physical strength to eat our own food. I think about Koreans and how we had fermented foods, right? And that's huge in our community
Mm.
and culture. It comes from a place of very poor, settings of not having enough of whatever. But then we were able to develop fermentation as a source of keeping the food safe to eat for a long periods of time. Now we also know that those also are very feeding of probiotics, probiotics, and is super
So
healthy and
true.
nourishing
Yeah.
of our bodies too. And
Yeah.
so there's so many ways that we gain strength from our culture. And one tangible way that we know for sure that we are passed down a very great deal of intergenerational strengths is just seeing the food on our table.
That's so true. I never thought
Yeah.
about food in that way, but it is. It's from previous generations, and it's what feeds not only our physical body, but our soul, our mind. It fuels everything, and how proud we can be of
Yeah.
the beautiful diversity of the food in our collective community. I'm curious to know, Soo Jin, what's your favorite food?
What is my favorite food?
Yeah,
But
it is.
okay. So so Koreans, we like to have a spread of side dishes. If you've ever been to a Korean restaurant, you know that you're not just ordering one dish. You're just what you're ordering is the main dish, but you will be served a bunch of side dishes. And so for me to choose one thing is like, I can't just eat one thing.
I can't.
And so an entire spread of just like side dishes and a plain white rice,
That's
that's my comfort food.
love that. I love that answer. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I'm curious to know from you if we could go back to the healing process for a minute. Why might self-compassion be an important skill to cultivate during any healing or during a healing process? Or maybe I'm being too
Absolutely.
presumptive and maybe it's not. So,
No, it
yeah.
absolutely is. I mean, and
Okay.
that's why we had dedicated an entire chapter for compassion and we put self in parentheses. Self-compassion in our Asian American community's healing process because it's a language that has never been taught to us. Again, it's a language where compassion is part of our bloodline. We really do take care of other folks and we love other people in a way where it sometimes neglects us
Mm,
and our own needs. And I think it's time for us to really honor our love for other folks and bring up room for ourselves too.
yeah.
The perfectionistic, high expectations, our achievement based worth that we had all talked about, it feeds into this idea that we don't have a space, we don't have a place of belonging in this world. That internalized message over and over again. And so it's not just external things, it really is internal where we neglect ourselves. And so it's so important for us to bring that language back, how we speak to other people, how we treat other people, how we treat our family and friends, how we treat our pets. That language and that love that you have, we really need to develop it for ourselves too. And there is room for both. It's not one or the other.
Mm,
It's not being selfish to have and develop our self compassionate language because so oftentimes we feel guilty taking care of
yeah.
ourselves because often we say, well, that means I'm just putting myself before everyone
Yeah.
else. And I think, I don't know why, maybe perhaps the media and the way that, what white society, the American society has taught us that
Mhm.
because it's a very individualized society. But it doesn't have to be that way. Self compassion just means that we're creating room for ourselves alongside other folks in our lives.
Thank you for painting that visual for us too, because
Mhm.
I feel as though, yes, in general, especially as I've learned through Courage Class, we are very much a collectivist community across the Asian American umbrella, and you can have two of these ideas existing at the same time, literally
Absolutely.
alongside. You can take care of others, and you can also take care of yourself. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you certainly saying that. Soo Jin, I had asked you about your favorite food a
Yeah.
question ago. And one of the things, and you had said, "Oh, I have to choose just one." And I want to ask you now, this book, Where I Belong. Everyone, encourage class, go out and get it. We will leave a link to get the book. I highly, highly recommend. It's an incredible book. And one of my favorite components of the book is the skills and the strategies that I can literally take today if I wanted to start engaging and exploring my own healing process. And I'm wondering from you, is there one or two or maybe even three, I
All
don't
of
wanna
them.
limit you. I don't wanna but what do you
Mm.
think if someone wanted to take those first steps right now, is there a specific skill or recommendation that you might have to that person who's listening?
Absolutely. It's going to sound so simple, and yet it is the most important thing of a human healing process for all sorts of healing process, not just emotional, mental, but physical as well. It starts with breathing. I just slowed that down right now because I realized I was just holding my breath as I was listening to your question too.
Mm.
Because my mind was racing, like filtering through all the different chapters of, the exercises that we have and the journaling prompts that I have. And I was
Mhm.
just holding my breath and I was thinking about like, which one should I choose? And then I was like, wait, of course, the most basic thing and the thing that we try to teach you the most in the book is different ways of recognizing your breath.
You do, yeah.
And so I want to say, just right now in this moment, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath in and out and recognize how your body is feeling. And so to pause and to listen to yourself, making that pause means making room for compassion. All of that comes and starts from a place of learning how to take a deep breath.
I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
I think is that the first I wanna say, is that the first exercise you introduce, I think, early
Yes, it
on?
is.
Is it the
Yeah.
5, 4, 3, 2,
Yeah.
1, I feel like,
I'm
or,
not sure if that one
if I'm
or
not
there is also the box. Yeah,
yes,
that I think chapter 1 has box
yes.
breathing, and so we put that in there on purpose. It is the first step in healing.
And you know what was so powerful about that specific one? It's the first time I've ever seen a visual of box breathing. It actually is really hard. I've tried it before, watching a YouTube, like I've tried, and this was the first. In fact, maybe we would, would that be okay if we shared that, that maybe a picture of that
Absolutely.
on the,
Yes. Yes.
like a
Yeah.
screenshot, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Like,
not something we invented, so I would
oh,
love
okay,
for everyone to know about it. Yeah.
okay.
So box breathing, just so that listeners know exactly what it
Mhm.
is you imagine a square and each side represents the first side of breathing in for 4 seconds, the next side holding in your breath for 4 seconds. And then as you're drawing the third side of the box, you breathe out for 4 seconds. And then the last side of the box, as you're drawing it, you're holding it for 4 seconds. So it's breathing in, holding, out, holding, in,
Mhm.
holding, out, holding. And then you're just counting to the 4 seconds.
And what does that do to you when you were doing that?
Lindsay, you had mentioned you have never had a visual for breathing. When you're visualizing, it automatically blocks out everything else in your vision that is pulling you away from your focus of breathing, right? And so then when we create this visual and you're following along, you're engaging more of your senses to solely focus on the one thing that matters to you right now in this moment for just 1 or 2 minutes, just to breathe. And we realize how hard that is if we're just saying, relax, take a breath, and your mind is still
If your
racing.
mind is
About,
racing,
yeah,
yeah.
yes. And so you force your mind to think about something else and make it all in tune with the breath.
And, I don't know if this is, part of the process, but what I especially found so helpful was I actually traced the box with my
Yes.
finger.
That is
Okay.
absolutely helpful. And I give the instruction very many times to say if you're comfortable, then make the box with your fingers in
Mm,
the air. Because again, the more senses that you're engaging,
yeah,
the more your body and your mind is in tuned to that breath.
I see. I see. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Sujin, is there, as we come to the end of this discussion, is there anything that you would want to share that maybe I haven't asked you? And it's okay if there's not. We can certainly edit this
Yeah.
part out.
It's
Yeah.
not that you haven't asked me anything,
Mm,
but one thing that I wanted to note is we're talking about this healing journey here, and I know that very oftentimes when we talk about stories, and when you're reading those stories too, we made sure that various people are in different stages of their healing journey too. And so you'll see sometimes people that doesn't really have a conclusion to their healing journey. It's
Mm,
because they're still on that journey,
I
or
see.
they've just discovered something as well. And so I want to just note that if anyone is struggling right now, that you're not behind in anything, that you can begin at a place of just, like I had said, even just taking that pause in this moment right now to begin that healing journey. I don't want you to be turned away just because you're hearing about all these wonderful stories of where people have come out of at the end. But there is no end to this journey
Mm.
either. And this is your journey. Make it however you see fit to your life.
It's not a one size fits all process.
Not at all.
Okay, I see. I see. Thank you for underscoring that. That's an incredibly important point.
Yeah.
That everyone go out and get the book Where I Belong: Healing Trauma and Embracing Asian American Identity. Soo Jin, as we come to a close, could you share with us, what does courage mean to you?
Ugh. Courage means to me choosing authenticity, no matter the situation. And I think that has been such a hard journey that I've discovered for myself, and I've discovered for so many of the Asian American clients that I work with, is that we just feel that we're not allowed to be authentic to who
Yeah.
we are, and to choose that no matter who says what. And to choose that, even though there is like this inner language that we have developed for ourselves, that no, 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 that place doesn't belong here right now. No, that part of you does not belong there right now. This is not the time to speak up. This is not the time to be creative,
Mhm.
right? To be able to just choose to do that anyways.
That is so well said. Soo Jin Lee, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much again for this wonderful
Thank you.
conversation.